Hi everyone, I'm Chris Duchesne, and I'm going to be showing you the visibility that you'd see from an enterprise perspective. A lot of that's been talked about has been more focused on the external looking in, and I just want to give you a quick snapshot of what you would see from the inside looking out. So I'm actually going to log into my account right now.
I keep forgetting to ask each one of you what your superhero is.
Nighthawk.
Oh.
Nice.
That's right. So this is my dashboard. When I first log into ThousandEyes every time, I'm going to see the test that I want to show. So for my account, I could actually customize it and choose to show, maybe if it's a group of people, I could choose to show just the assets I care about monitoring. And as Mo had mentioned, this could be assets that are external SaaS providers you utilize, or it could even be internal assets that are in regional data centers. So the focus is inside and inside to outside. So it really depends, right? Because as Ricardo had mentioned, from an MPLS perspective, we're going to show your own internal WAN just the same way we'd show you the internet. So the visibility is more than just for seeing what SaaS connectivity looks like. And I want to give a quick example of a use case that you'd see that's quite common in the enterprise, which is, especially from a network perspective, is a user at one of your office locations calls and complains about, hey, I can't get to this service, something's not working. Well, the problem usually is that it only lasts 10 to 20 minutes. It's something that happened briefly and someone complained, but you don't really have data about what happened, where it was, or who was responsible, right? So was it DocuSign that I'm utilizing and can't connect to? Is it their responsibility? Or maybe it was something on, the local connectivity, a local POP or whatnot. So I'll actually jump into my snapshots.
Can you actively define, let's say, your top 10 applications and then actively probe each one every X amount of minutes or hours?
Yeah, so just like Mo had showed before, from the testing standpoint, you're going to create new tests, and then you would just put in all the application IP addresses or domain info for each of those applications. And so I'm actually going to go into snapshots, or the events that I call, right? So we talked about how much data do you store. A lot of data that's there isn't very useful because it's just a lot of white noise. And so from the snapshot standpoint, we could store the events that we find more informative. So in this case here, this is for one login. And this is an event that recorded about 30 to 40 minutes. And it kind of goes over the case of two users, right, in the Atlanta offices essentially call in and complain that they can't connect to the service. Right? So they're trying to get into one login, a single sign-on service, and it's failing. Is it something that we could detect being out on the internet? Is it something localized? What could it be? And so instantly, as you've already seen this several times before, right, we have that node. It's highlighted red. We can identify that it's a shared POP, that they're both in the Atlanta region, and that everything else, or all of our other office locations, would have no problem getting out to. And then even better than that is we have a timeline of it, right? So like I was saying, usually this kind of thing happens for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe even 5 minutes. And there's just no information about what happened. So you go ahead and tell that user to run a trace route, run ping commands, but you don't really gather any data that's very useful because the event has elapsed. And so essentially you can collect these snapshots over time. And if you find that to be a common problem for a specific node, let's say this node right here is having an issue on a regular basis, I might want to voice my opinion to my local service provider, or maybe to, if it's further out the internet toward, maybe in this case, towards one login's login information, login site, I might forward it to them and open a case.
But do you define how often you're capturing this data?
Yeah, so it's based on your first question. Yeah, so you can actually choose how often you want to run the tests. It's 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, depending upon the granularity of data. You can create a test, run it for a couple days, turn it off, disable it, and all of that data is also available through the API.
And the private agent's available in, you said, in like a Linux package format, right? What kind of requirements does that have? I mean, I wonder, we're actually finally reaching a point where in some cases network switches and routers actually run Linux in a format that a user can get, command line access to. Can we run the agents directly on a switch?
Of course.
That's an interesting question, and we've heard
that's a little forward-looking for me, but
we've definitely heard that one come up from a couple of our end users already, and the actual footprint of the agent's quite small. If you're just running network tests and not running the browser-based tests, you're looking at only about 500 megabytes of memory and no disk I/O requirements really. It's very straightforward. No CPU really. It's just
500 megabytes of memory though?
Yeah. Yeah, well, because it's running a Linux instance, right? So if you have
It's
other...
the Linux kernel and everything.
Right.
Oh,
But everything on the
Yeah,
actual
size.
system.
But
It's not
that's for the virtual
us.
appliance, but
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I'm talking like you said there's like a package you can install and
Yeah, so the package itself, the actual machine would have to have about 512 megabytes. Our usage is very minimal, if that makes more sense.
Now, two questions from the enterprise perspective.
Sure.
So obviously you could also poll the internal applications. So
Right.
if I want to use this for purely internal monitoring,
Yeah.
I can do that.
Right, so we use the local DNS that you provide to the agent. So if it's all internally routed and it's a custom FQDN, it's all going to route through as it would internally from an internal standpoint.
And then the data sort of gets exported to your cloud solution, right?
Correct.
Which might represent some problems for certain organizations.
yeah.
Right.
So
It's
are
a
you
challenge we've worked through with quite a few, but it hasn't been as challenging as I thought it would be. But yes. Since we are a 100% SaaS service for viewing the data today.
So are you thinking about like a private appliance solution where I could have my data within my organization?
That would be a question for Mohit.
And even to go further on that, data governance is an issue for me. So keeping it in Australia is important. So even if you hosted the storage of the information at least in the same country, that ticks my box. But if for someone a bit stricter, might require it on site.
Well, yeah, there are two levels.
Yeah.
Well, there are three levels. Within EU, within my country, and within my organization.
And a fourth level, not in the US.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's level 0 to start with.
Our current solution is pushing all the data back on our side, but we're definitely all ears with all our existing customers and prospects on understanding concerns and seeing if it's something we can address with more of the security certifications that are underway, which establish us as following the best practices security, or whether it's something that involves a change in the architecture.
Well, let's say that you should start thinking about opening a site in Europe.
We've had some conversations going on right now with a large European company that is pushing us in a similar direction. So I wouldn't mind the frequent trips to Europe.
More than just in Europe, though, right? You're going to need one in Germany, and you're going to need one in...
Well, within Europe is usually sort of okay if they choose a country which is respected by other countries.
Is there?
Maybe certain countries are not a good option.
So that first example is pretty brief. It's kind of the opposite of what you had seen earlier, which was more of the service provider issue. We do identify localized issues. The other thing that hasn't been shown yet, which is also of interest, especially to enterprise standpoint, as SaaS applications are rolled out from a global perspective, or even regional data centers, some application that's centralized, user experience, getting a quick understanding of how software runs in different locations around all of your office locations. We have the Selenium transactions that are really easy to deploy. And so in this case here, this is a very simple DocuSign login, log out. I log into my account, I check for some text, and I log back out, and then I time it. I could deploy this really instantly and then get a waterfall with all the objects that are loaded in this series of tests. And we actually have quite a few large enterprises that run this against 30 or 40 different locations around the globe and get a good understanding of, well, my users in India are complaining about logging into Salesforce, and it takes them 57 seconds to run this one test, whereas my users in San Jose, it takes 19 seconds. And so it gives you that baseline as well as historical information about what it was like at different points in time.
Now, once you're able to dig in that far, are you able to do any further characterization with some of the delay, like in terms of, so if you've been able to determine the server's processing time on a request, and you've estimated the bandwidth with some of the tools that you have, are you then able to characterize, potential queue delay versus serialization delay and things of that nature?
That hasn't been as much of our focus today.
Okay.
The focus has more so been to give a good base point of what it's like around the globe,
Yeah.
and then combining it with our other vantage points from the standpoint of network topology and identifying if there's network issues that are causing.
But certainly in the enterprise where you have the opportunity to instrument all the way to potentially the server that's serving the application to the users, it makes a big deal, a big difference whether that 200 milliseconds of delay that you see from time to time is actually server processing response time, or whether it's queue delay because you're just not prioritizing that traffic enough onto your MPLS links or whatever.
Right, certainly.
So I'm curious about this with the waterfall effect that you have here.
Sorry, let me just address that real quick. Can you run to the HTTP server response time view? Yeah, so go into response time. So right there, when you see the breakdown, there's the connect and the wait. So connect is when you're actually establishing the TCP connection, and wait is sending the HTTP request to getting the response back. So in an ideal world, where your servers are responding right away, the wait, the receive time or the wait time and the connect time should be the same, right? So if your server is taking longer to respond, you will see the wait time being much higher. And you can use the connect time as a baseline to compare that and see if it's actually a network queuing issue or if it's a server responding later than it should. Does that make sense?
It does. You still may not necessarily know where you were doing that waiting, though.
Yes.
In terms of whether it was the server, is the server CPU pegged, and so it can't get around to actually serving the page.
We can't tell within the server.
I mean, this goes a little bit more into application performance monitoring from the server's perspective versus the cloud, but if you're looking at a solution that can be just as applicable to enterprise as service provider, that kind of thing matters.
What you do? You deploy another agent at the server.
But that's what I'm saying. Is if you can deploy the agent on your server, and they're already estimating.
So you're measuring the loopback interface.
Right, but
then you're measuring the remote one, and you.
I mean, I think all the tools are there. It's a matter of doing the analytics then to determine this is potential queue delay, this is serialization delay because we're passing a response this big, and we think the.
You're absolutely right. But if you think about the enterprise side, they don't really have control on the server side. So
no, they do if the server is inside.
Right? Yeah, but if it's using Salesforce or ServiceNow or so on, and that's the use case that, from an enterprise standpoint, it's a consumer. So even knowing that it's a server issue is huge.
The next question. So how about if you've got, so if Salesforce is one of your customers, then are you able? You were talking about data sharing before. Is there actually sharing of the collected data to enable an enterprise to see Salesforce's perspective of the performance as well, right?
That's the NSA's job. That's not their.
There is the use case around if Salesforce is running periodic testing to their infrastructure, they might want to share that periodic test view with everybody else, but it's highly unlikely that they would go into the application stack details of like where specific application performance issues are to their customers. We haven't really come across that as much, but there is the general like
weird that they don't want to share that.
So I have a question in regards to the SSL side. So you could actually preemptively use this because it's watching all the time. You could tell certificate expiration dates that are happening.
We catch that.
So you catch all those, which is really useful because that's obviously a big concern, especially on the internal side. How many people forget on load balancers, right? When you're doing SSL offload, you forget to do updates for certificates.
Yeah, and it will produce an error message. Sorry, it will produce an alert, right? So the minute you have SSL errors, the availability test will fail and it will produce an alert. So
will you actually pull out the expiration date and like give preemptive warning so you can say a threshold?
We've got that request before.
Yeah.
Where people wanted it to actually say that it's going to expire in a week or 2 weeks or something. We haven't implemented an alert around that yet, but a lot of our users use the API to pull information. So, if you think about like getting that raw details from the API, you can easily set up an alert.
And since you guys are querying on the DNS side, you guys could actually scrub through to look for where SSL published certificate sets are actually published out on both external and internal site resources, because there's a lot of times when you publish certificates, you might use a third party that's off net from you, so you may not be paying as much attention to when the certificate expires off net. So instead of having to use something like Howler or something else that's going to go out and dig and you're not used to running that sort of tool, it would make a lot of sense that you would have this be able to do that for you too.
That's an interesting point, and we have seen certificate expirations for not your own domain but other domains, and I think it's an interesting idea to sort of correlate using DNS where that factor might be. So it's something to think about for us for sure.
Yeah, another technical one. I apologize for not asking it before, but I've seen the waterfall only now. So you're obviously scrubbing the HTML page for external links and figuring out where they go. But what if I load things through JavaScript?
It's actually a full browser. It's actually a Chrome browser. If you're looking
Okay.
So it's loading the whole.
whatever Chrome is doing, that's what you do.
Okay.
I think the only thing we'll miss is like Flash interactions. So if there is, it's just a Flash object. That's it.
Nobody wants that.
That wasn't on the mic. So just to reiterate, that it is a Chrome browser that is running a full Chrome browser on each agent that will pull it all.
I have one more question that probably I should have asked one of the previous presenters, but how do you guys deal with like content distribution networks, right? So from multiple points across the internet, if you're probing to something, you may get very different responses based on where traffic's being served from within a CDN. Even to the point where just DNS round robin and things like that, right? You might get a DNS failure occasionally because some site's returning 35 different targets for that A record, and one of them is bad right now, right? So you get a lot of disparate looking data. Do you have anything that can like help you?
Are you asking from the SaaS or the web provider side, or from the enterprise?
I mean, I guess I'm asking from the enterprise side, but it would probably be something that would be affected, that it would come into play when I'm talking to a SaaS service, right? So again, Salesforce or something like that, where the content is distributed all across the internet, right?
Well, so from
you're going to get a lot of different views based on where you are.
Right. So yeah, the enterprise perspective, if they're installing agents in the local locations, it's going to be very similar to what their own users will be experiencing. Yeah. It's not going to necessarily for every aspect, but it's going to be pretty accurate in terms of the next.
Especially if you're behind the NAT, right? And so if your agent in the enterprise location is going to a specific Akamai POP, all your users in that NAT are likely going there anyways. There's also two different implementations, right? There are ones where you terminate TCP connections upfront as a CDN, and then there are others where the TCP connections to the home object are going to the data centers, but specific objects are being served by the CDN. So if you go into the page load view, you'd be able to spot a specific object URL that is being directed to Akamai, and if you have problems with that, you can set a test for that specific URL. So you now start hitting Akamai to do the whole transaction on the Akamai side. Okay. We've often also found issues where routes are going to different parts. You would have a local node in Singapore, but it's being routed to UK or so on due to hot potato, cold potato. The other aspect that we didn't cover is, and it's really interesting, is when it comes to Anycast and DNS.
Oh, I was going to ask.
And we all know how fun that is, right? So the path visualization can really help you understand which Anycast instance is misbehaving, because you can see the next hops. Okay. And even though it's all concentrating on one IP, if you look at the next hops, you could immediately tell that the Singapore locations are getting the wrong DNS record because of this Anycast instance, because you trace the paths out. And so that gets really interesting as well.
Cool.
So I'll wrap up really quickly. There's a lot you can do with this, and lots of different ways that it's being utilized, especially from the enterprise and SaaS world, both being different use cases in general. But one thing that we didn't quite hint at and Mohit mentioned was snapshot sharing. The first iteration of snapshot sharing is just creating a share that you could share internally, which we utilize a lot to create an event or to share with the provider for, let's say, you open a case or whatnot. But there's also live sharing, and this is where, let's say a SaaS provider happens to be one of our customers, and an enterprise is also our customer, and then let's say they open a long-term case because they're looking into something. They could decide, hey, we're going to share all these tests that we created to your service with you, and they could actually type in, I'm just going to put an example, DocuSign.net here. They could type in the domain and share it with that actual account, so that while they're working on this troubleshooting standpoint, they're going to see active data that you're generating from these tests in your enterprise, all of your offices, for the series of the support case, or even longer than that if it's something where they're interested in sharing it long term. So that's live sharing. And essentially those are the few basic pieces with the enterprise side that we've covered over the past couple months, and a lot more new things are coming as well. Any other questions?
Well, there is one. So first you said that, only one. First you said that you have very thin agent that does the monitoring, and then when we came to the waterfall, it was all of a sudden, no, we have the Chrome browser, and this is what the Chrome browser sees. So these two things don't exactly match.
There's two installs you can do. You can do the lightweight install, which works without the browser, and the minimum requirements are very low.
Right.
We've actually had that agent running on Raspberry Pis and very lightweight devices. If you want to do transactional testing, you need the browser, and so that's when you install that as a module, and it needs certain minimum requirements.
Of course.
And that runs separate from the
So you can think of it as a thin agent that can eat a lot and become fat from time to time.
So you have thin and thick agent.
Yeah.
And it's not too thick either. It's also pretty low requirements.
Do you expose any of this data via open APIs from? Yeah.
Everything. So everything except maybe the details of all this hop-by-hop connectivity right now is exposed, right? So we do that now as well. So we're very pro API, and a lot of our customers have really done a lot of integration on their backend, because this is just, it's one side of one kind of data. And we want to relate that with everything else that they care about. So they integrate that into other systems.
I was thinking if they were looking at it via an API perspective, they can dynamically change routes. If they realize access to a certain website is down through one pop, they can reroute internally over their backbone to go out a different,
Wow, that's a good one.
So Ivan kind of got me. So the two-agent model, I assume in-game you guys are anticipating networking to kind of follow compute on actually having operating systems that are independent of hardware. So
Sorry, what's
the Cumulus model, right? So you've got a Linux box running on hardware. You need to install agents on it. I mean, it becomes so much easier to install your product at that point, right?
So is the question around?
Are you looking to have the full feature set running on network systems?
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So we've actually not experimented with this yet, but I've heard certain appliances of vendors actually support just pure VMs as well. And so we hypothetically can run the agent as a VM on an existing WAN acceleration box or so on as well, or an Arista switch or so on. And so the idea is to just be in a situation where you can push it really easily without specific hardware requirements. As we go forward, we can do more custom stuff that is enterprise related. And so, we have several things that we'll discuss briefly in the roadmap discussion that is off camera that will tie into more depth within the enterprise information that you can get.
Awesome.
Pretty cool. Yeah, you could really use this to sort of monitor how my two upstream providers are doing. Yeah. And I use that then in my BGP controller.
Like IPSLA on steroids.
Right? Yeah. To feed that into my core routers. Yeah.
He's excited. Look at the grin on his face. It's from ear to ear.
Yeah, and then the stage one for us was always really figuring out what's going on. And stage two will be what can we do with this information that's beyond just finding out where the problems are. And so maybe next year, NFD, we can talk about some more exciting stuff to appeal more. Cool.
Great.
Thank you, Chris.
Well done.
Thank you.